What we're going to be working on in this exercise is we're going to be looking at how we can create a pre-comp and how we can sync up different instances of our snail mouth, our snail expression, to coincide with some of the sound effects that I'm using. So this is going to be what we'll be creating in this section of our course. You can see that the mouth is changing and it kind of syncs up with the whistling sounds that we have. So let's look into how we can do this. We're going to be using some new techniques that will allow us to be able to create something like this, and I think you're going to find it really useful. Instead of working with this exact same composition, I'm going to make a bunch of pre-comps so that I can concentrate on the various sections of my project without having to deal with all of these layers in one exact location. What we'll do to start off with is we're going to focus on the snail, and we're going to work on the different mouth expressions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my snail, the snail shell, and all of the mouth layers. I'm going to right-click on these layers and we're going to choose Precompose. This is going to take these layers and actually create a new composition. I'll call this snail mouth expressions. Now, we do have an option that is grayed out, and that's because we haven't used any attributes, so this one is not going to pertain to us. You do have the second option, which says move all attributes into new composition. This is going to allow us to place all of the currently selected layers into a new composition, and we will not check either of these other options. I'll click OK, and as you can see, those layers have all been compressed down to a new layer. This is actually a new composition called Snail Mouth Expressions. Let's go ahead and make a composition folder just so we can keep our project bin organized. Now I'll double click on the snail mouth expression to open this composition in its own window. To make it a little bit easier to work, I'm going to go into Composition, Composition Settings, and I'm going to change the background color to white. Remember that the background color doesn't really matter, since in essence this actually exists on a transparent layer, but it'll make our being able to work with the snail a little bit easier. I'm also going to zoom in on the snail. So we can use our zoom tool, or we can use keyboard shortcuts or our mouse scroll, but I'll just click, hold, and drag to zoom in on the snail. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select all of the layers that I want to be unique instances of the snail mouth. So the smile is going to be one, the surprised mouth is going to be another, our various stages of whistling are going to be their own instances, and then we also have the whistle air. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select these mouth layers, and then what we're going to do is we're going to place the playback head out 29 frames, which is going to put us right at 1 second. I'll come to the time code and I'll type 29, and as you can see, the playback head is going to jump right before 1 second. Now what I want to do is I want to trim all of the selected layers so that they only take up 1 second of time. To do this, I'm going to use Option or Alt, and then I'm going to hit the right bracket key. That will trim all of the layers to the playback head. Now, ultimately, I don't want all these layers to play simultaneously, so we're going to need to stagger the layers. We could do that manually by simply grabbing the layers and moving them out so that they're staggered, but there is an easier way. I'm going to select these layers. We're going to go up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. This is going to allow us to sequence the layers at 1 second. It is possible to create an overlap, but I don't want my layers to overlap, so I'm not going to check this. We'll go ahead and click OK, and as you can see, all of the layers have been sequenced out, and now they're just going to appear 1 second at a time. So if we turn all of our layers on, for the first second the snail is smiling, then he's surprised, then he starts to whistle, and then finally here's our whistle air. Now in this particular animation, when the snail is at its height of whistling, I actually want the air to show. So I'm going to move the air layer so that these two layers are going to be residing in the same point in time. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place my playback head at the very end, right before the snail loses all of its facial features, and we're going to trim these last two layers. So I'll select the snail and the snail shell, and we're going to go ahead and use our Option or Alt right bracket key. That will trim these to this particular point in time, and at this point I can really just make my composition match the end of what we've created. Our composition basically is ending at 5 seconds. I'm going to go up to Composition, Composition Settings, and we'll just change the duration to 5 seconds. I'm going to click OK, and as you can see, the composition now only takes up 5 seconds. Now what we'll do is we'll go back out to our main composition. You can see here is our snail expression, and if we scrub through the timeline, as I move my playback head, every second you'll see how the mouth on the snail is going to change. Now clearly we don't want this occurring quite like it is right now, but let me show you how we can harness this and make it work to our advantage. In order to show you this, I'm going to make a new composition just to keep things a little bit more simple. I'll go ahead and I'll call this composition Snail Whistle. I'm going to keep the settings that we've specified, and for the duration, I'm just going to make this 15 seconds long. I'll click OK, and here we are in our new composition. I'm going to place the snail mouth expression pre-comp within this composition, and then we're going to add some sound so that we can sync up the whistling to the sound. I'll go ahead and I'll double click in my project window, and I've already downloaded some sounds that I want to use. They're in a sound folder, so I'm simply going to select the entire folder and click Open. I'll open the sound folder, and I'm going to grab the whistling sound and drop it into my composition. I did want to mention that the whistling sound is 45 seconds, but we're just going to only be using a small portion of it. If we play the new composition, you will hear the whistling is going to start. Now what's going to be helpful in order for me to sync up the mouth of the snail with the whistling sound is to be able to see the waveform. In order to see a waveform for any sound file in After Effects, you can twirl open the layer, go into Audio, and open the Waveform section. This will display the waveform for you. In addition to being able to access the waveform in this way, you can use the keyboard shortcut of LL. That will just display the waveform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play different instances of our snail. So when there's no sound playing, I'm going to show the smiling version of our snail. In order to be able to show these different instances of our snail mouth, what we need to do is we need to use something called time remapping. Time remapping allows us to keyframe time or to animate time. For any given layer, we can have time move faster than normal, slower than normal. It can move forwards or backwards or anywhere in between. In order to do this, I'm going to right-click on the snail expression pre-comp, and I'm going to go to Time, Enable Time Remapping. This will go ahead and add a new property to this particular layer. Once we have this property in place, you'll see that you get two keyframes, one at the beginning and one at the end. In addition, I can grab the ending portion of this pre-comp and stretch it out. So I'm just going to make this match the duration of the current composition. Now once we get past 5 seconds, everything's going to disappear. But you'll see that that doesn't really matter because we can actually have After Effects display certain instances of the pre-comp at any time in which this layer is displaying within the timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the playback head to the beginning. You'll see that we see the smiling snail. We want that to continue until we get right before the whistle starts. So what I'll do is I already have keyframes on for time remapping. If I place my playback head at this location and I scrub, you can see that I'm actually changing the instances of what mouth expression is showing on our snail. And to make this a little easier, let's just zoom in once again. So as I move through, you can see that I can change the expressions, and this is something that we're keyframing. So this is right where we want to start the snail whistling, which this is our first whistling instance. If we scrub through the timeline, we're not going to hear any of our audio. If you want to hear the audio for whatever reason, you can Command or Control scrub. And this will allow you to actually hear the audio. Sometimes that can be useful. For our snail whistling, we're just going to go ahead and move this over a few frames, and then we'll make an adjustment to the actual mouth position so that we can show more of our whistling snail. And I'm just going to continue to put these in every few frames. So I'll just go ahead and add different keyframes, different states of the snail at its different amounts of whistle, if you will. And we're just going to create a few seconds of whistling. Ultimately, our animation is not going to be that long, so we don't need to fill up this entire whistling sound. We're just going to end up trimming it and making a shorter version of the whistling, because ultimately some stuff is going to happen to the snail and maybe it's not going to feel like whistling anymore. If you go past 5 seconds or to 5 seconds, you'll see that your element, your animation is going to disappear. So just know that that is something that potentially could happen to your snail. So I think this is our last one. I'm just going to zoom in on the timeline a little bit. Yeah, and let's just move this back to the initial instance. So if we go ahead and rewind, and I'm just going to move my work area so that it covers this portion that we've kind of been working on. And if we rewind to the beginning, you're going to see that the mouth positions are going to change, but if it extends past 1 second, which it does in this first instance, you will see that it's going to change even though we didn't create keyframes. We'll fix that in just a second. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And actually, maybe we want this to end right here. Let me just zoom in and we'll make just a few more keyframes at the end because it kind of ends a little bit abruptly. So I'm just going to move my playback head over here and we'll just change our mouth positions a little bit. Let's put a few more in here. All right, that's probably good. And then I'll just move my work area so it ends right there. All right. Now to fix this situation that's happening right here, because we don't want to have these expressions change, we want to just hold on the smile until the snail starts to whistle. We need to create hold keyframes. We want these keyframes to park on particular bit of artwork and hold. So what we're going to do is we're going to change all of these. I'm going to click on time remapping just to select all of the keyframes. I'll right click and I'm going to choose toggle hold keyframe. This is going to switch the keyframe icon to being a hold keyframe. And now if I scrub through this duration, even though this extends past a second, you're going to see that the smile is going to hold. So if we play our animation one more time, our snail is just going to show the expressions that we've specified. And essentially we're doing like a frame by frame type of animation. But this is a really great technique that you can use where you can essentially pick different instances of an animation. So if you're ever trying to do any lip syncing or just in the scenario that we have right here, this technique is going to work really well. And I really find this technique to be extremely useful when you're trying to sync certain facial positions up with sound. This can be a great way to work. So hopefully you can see various applications for this. Because I don't want to use the entire 15 seconds, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just trim the end of my animation down. So I don't need any of this extra whistling down here. So I'm just going to park my playback head at my last keyframe, I'll use my keyboard shortcut of J to just get to the very last keyframe. So if we zoom in, you can see that I'm on my last keyframe. And let's actually just move one frame ahead. So I'll just type in 508 just to get one frame past, because the keyframe actually, when we set a keyframe, it's this bit of time that's actually going to show. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim both of these layers. So I'll select both my pre-comp and my whistle. And if I want to trim the out point, I'm going to use that keyboard shortcut of Option right bracket key just to trim that out. And at this point, I don't need the composition to be that long. So I'm just going to go to composition settings, and we'll just change our duration of our composition to match our current duration, which is 5 seconds and 8 frames. So I've done that, and now I have a little animation where my snail is just going to be sitting there smiling and then gets the urge to whistle, and there he is doing his little whistle thing. So that takes care of us being able to sync this snail up with the sound and being able to control the facial expressions.